Hi, and welcome back to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is September 16th, and today we're going to hear part 2 of the article that we started yesterday, entitled Race and Injustice in To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, you can see by the italics that To Kill a Mockingbird is a book, and it's an extremely well-known, famous, often read book in America. It's assigned probably in most junior and senior high schools at some point, maybe even grade schools sometimes. It was published in 1960, and it addressed the issue of race. And that is the most sensitive issue in America. I don't think there's any argument about that.
I agree. And what's unique about this book as well is that author Harper Lee, she only wrote one book in her life. She only published one book in her life, and she continued to write articles and continued to do work. However, this was her only book because her work was so criticized by so many people for so many reasons. She just said, I'm done. I'm good.
I've had enough.
That's
this
right.
is it.
Now, that said, this book has been incredibly popular. It sells more than 1 million copies a year, even today, which is more than The Great Gatsby, which is another iconic American novel. Probably, I feel like we're going to talk about this someday.
Written by a Minnesotan.
And here's the thing. It is the ultimate one-hit wonder. A one-hit wonder is a song that becomes extremely famous for a short period of time and then disappears. That musician or group never writes another famous song. The best example I could think of was Hey Macarena. This is the ultimate Hey Macarena. Nell Harper Lee knew that she had a hit and she's forever secure. She just said, you know what? I'm done writing. I don't need to anymore. Keep buying my book. I'm going to sit on the royalties.
I don't want to deal with all of the problems and the criticisms. Right. And I can really understand that. It's worse now with the internet because people will get bullied for no reason whatsoever except that they have gone public. Nothing else.
I have a few successful online projects that I'm not going to talk about, but I will say no matter what I do, I get criticized for one reason or another. No matter how long I think about something, no matter how carefully I frame something, someone will criticize it. And I'm not making big arguments. I'm talking about like video game channels. I'm talking about just like which is more fun, Super Mario or Zelda? And people will just attack. It's just people have that in them to attack another person that you're not personally familiar with. It's a crazy phenomenon.
2 things going on. Number 1 is usually they just want attention. And number 2 is they can often remain anonymous for those 2 reasons.
Yeah.
And 3, there are no consequences usually.
Yeah, and to be fair, when I see people make unreasonable arguments or complain about something, I also disregard what they think.
You have to. You cannot let that bother you at all. And I almost always, if I post anything online, I make it positive. Because if you make one tiny little negative comment, there's going to be something.
A lot of pushback.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of pushback. All right. Okay. So part 2 of Race and Injustice in To Kill a Mockingbird. Despite winning the case, Bob wants to get revenge on Atticus for publicly embarrassing him. Bob tries to murder Scout and Jem as they are walking past the old Bradley home at night. Boo hears their cries and rushes outside to save them. He stabs Bob and carries the children to safety. To keep Boo out of jail, the sheriff claims that Bob attacked the kids and then accidentally fell on his own knife. The event makes Scout feel bad because she once unfairly labeled Boo as creepy and strange because he suffered from a mental disability. At the end of the book, she pledges to treat people better and eliminate hatred and prejudice from her life.
Nell Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, grew up in a small town similar to the one described in the story. Her novel would go on to win the Pulitzer Prize in 1961 and eventually sell more than 40 million copies worldwide. It remained controversial, however, because it dealt with a sensitive issue in America, race relations. Rather than deal with harsh criticism, Lee decided that it would be the last book she would publish during her lifetime.
A primary topic in the book is the concept of good and evil. It suggests that people are born good, but they can become bad after experiencing evil and hatred in society. Sadly, it's often innocent members of society like Tom and Boo who suffer most. Their lives are destroyed because society has unfairly judged and labeled them. Nonetheless, the book manages to deliver a positive message at its close. Atticus is able to teach his children that good and bad exist in everyone, and that we should not lose faith in humanity. Instead, it's better to sympathize with others and hope that they will eventually change their ignorant and prejudiced views. Now, I want to mention now before I forget it, if you have any way of accessing the movie, please watch the movie. The movie is so well made, and it will be easier to kind of go through what happens than reading the book. A lot of us will say, well, I should read that book, and we never, ever get to it. It's much easier to just sit down and watch a movie. This one is absolutely worth it. I remember it was black and white. Maybe it was not, but in my mind it's black and white. Maybe it's from pictures that I saw. But in any case, the movie is really a great one. If you are looking for a good novel to practice your English on, I also recommend the book because the language is not that difficult. The issues are thorny and difficult, but the language is not quite as difficult, which is why it's read so much in high schools. Okay, let's go back to the beginning, our first sentence. Despite winning the case, Bob wants to get revenge on Atticus for publicly embarrassing him.
Well, this deserves a recap. So at the end of day one, we learned that Atticus, Scout's father, was the lawyer, and he tries to defend Tom. Tom is accused of raping Mayella, but Atticus, the lawyer father, says actually it's Bob who beat Mayella, and Tom and Mayella actually have a consensual sexual relationship, meaning they both agree to it. Tom, however, goes to jail. He tries to escape and is killed. Now, this brings us back to day two where we currently are.
Right, and it says that Bob now, even though he won the case because the jury just ignored the evidence and they convicted Tom. So Bob won. In spite of that, Bob wants to get revenge on Atticus because he made it public that, in fact, his daughter had had a sexual relationship with a black man. In addition, Bob had beaten her, and he found that extremely shameful and embarrassing. He now wants to get revenge. Bob tries to murder Scout and Jem as they are walking past the old Radley home at night. Now, this guy is really bad news.
This is terrible. Like, I'm going to get revenge on the man that said I beat my daughter by killing his children. That's
bringing the kids into it. Yeah, that's pretty awful. So he actually tries to murder the children because they're the ones who kind of brought it out into the open. Boo hears their cries and rushes outside to save them. So by this point in the story, you remember that the children found a present in a tree that they believed was given to them by Boo. Boo wants to connect with them because he actually has no connections with the outside world. It doesn't matter whether you are mentally incapacitated or not. We humans are social animals. We cannot live a normal life without having connections to other humans. So Boo now feels this connection to the children. And so now when the children have been threatened, their lives have been threatened, Boo hears them crying and he wants to try to save them. He stabs Bob and carries the children to safety. So he actually succeeds in what he went out to do. He stabs the person who was threatening to kill him. And in fact, he was in his rights to do that. That's self-defense, or actually killing somebody who was about to kill somebody else. And then he carries the children away so they will be safe. To keep Boo out of jail, the sheriff claims that Bob attacked the kids and then accidentally fell on his own knife. Now, here, they are actually going to try to lie to try to keep Boo out of trouble. Now, Boo is mentally incapacitated. He did something heroic. He saved the children from being killed. In the process, he also killed somebody else. But they made up a story so that Boo would not be sent to jail and probably be given the death sentence. So the story that they made up was not that Bob was going to kill the children and then Boo killed Bob. What they said was that Bob attacked the children, and then he made a mistake. He had a knife, and then he fell on his knife, and he died himself. That part is not true. In fact, Bob was killed by Boo, but they want to keep Boo out of trouble.
Now, if this sounds ridiculous, there's actually a lot of true history back here. If we remember day one, we talked about the lynch mob. The group tried to attack Tom and kill him by hanging him on a tree before he could even have a trial. Now, if this sounds unusual, no, this is actually a really common issue. And if you go on the internet and you look this up, you will see horrible pictures where entire towns, including the police and the sheriff, are looking directly into the camera without masks on their face after illegally hanging and killing people. The sheriffs in small towns, especially a long time ago, were incredibly powerful people. They had the power to put you in jail or keep you out. People would believe them. Even if there was a lot of evidence that you were innocent, if the sheriff decided you were guilty and you needed to go, you were going to have a very hard time. And this is kind of a little bit of an example of that.
Actually, there was a time when I was sometimes sharing these things on Facebook, over Facebook, for example, of the kind of things that you mentioned, that white people, they showed no shame and they had pictures of a dead black person hanging from a tree, etc. The reason a lot of these started coming up is because we are finally addressing the issue of race more openly, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything else. It's very complicated. Don't think it's straightforward. There are many problems in it. But a lot of things like that were being shared. But I would get feedback from my black friends who I've known since kindergarten. Like, I don't want to see any more of this. I've seen enough of it. I just can't take it. Just like I have had to stop listening to a lot of political news because I just got sick of it. I couldn't keep my emotional stability and equanimity by seeing so much of this news. So a lot of this stuff is extremely upsetting.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting, exactly the word that you use. The event makes Scout feel bad because she once unfairly labeled Boo as creepy and strange because he suffered from a mental disability. And we as humans often do that. We will make fun of people who are different. That doesn't mean they're worse or anything else. They are simply different from us. All of us humans do this. And now Scout is realizing she was really unkind to make fun of him, and here he has saved her life.
If this word creepy seems unusual, it means a little bit like disgusting. Think of how an insect walks. An insect creeps. That's to describe the way an insect walks. Kind of slow, and insects are a little bit disgusting. Therefore, creepy means disgusting.
Depending on the insect. I like some better than others. Okay. At the end of the book, she pledges to treat people better and eliminate hatred and prejudice from her life. Now, I think this is something that was kind of edited into the ending of the book later, because in the end, I believe the author felt quite pessimistic about the whole situation. And she originally wrote the book to end on a more pessimistic note, if I remember correctly. Check this online. Okay, I don't necessarily have all the details right. But she was under pressure to kind of give a ray of hope at the end, so she kind of added that on for that reason. Let's give everybody a ray of hope. And that, in fact, is something we humans need.
When we pledge something, we promise to do something, or we promise to work for another person, especially a long time ago. And prejudice is actually a pretty easy word to break apart. We have pre, which means before, and then we have Judice, which looks like the word judge. So you prejudge someone based upon the way they look or some other feeling you have, and you don't give them a fair opportunity to prove they're a good or worthwhile person.
Simply because they're different,
right?
Or simply because we can. We often do awful things when we have the power, and power always leads to abuse. There's no way around it. Okay, next paragraph.
Nell Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, grew up in a small town similar to the one described in the story.
So the author could write about these things with great authority. She was writing about a situation that she knew firsthand. She grew up in exactly this kind of situation.
Yeah, quite literally. Her own father was a well-known lawyer. She grew up through the Great Depression. She grew up in a small town. Scout Finch, our protagonist, our main character here, actually uses her mother's maiden name. Finch was her mother's maiden name. There are many connections to her own life, which it allows her to write with such clarity and in such great detail because she's more or less describing a version of her own life.
Next sentence.
Her novel would go on to win the Pulitzer Prize in 1961 and eventually sell more than 40 million copies worldwide.
So she really struck a nerve. That was something that really resonated with people. To resonate means that when you hear about something or read about it or experience it, you can feel, yes, that's exactly what I feel. Yes, this is something really true, really important. So this resonated with many, many people in addition to being a good story.
So the Pulitzer Prize is a very important award you receive for writing a very influential or important book.
I don't think Pulitzer was a very nice man, but that's often true of famous people.
That is exactly true. Yeah, he wasn't very wonderful, but
never mind.
It's still good to get his prize.
Right. Okay, next
Let's
sentence.
Continue. It remained controversial, however, because it dealt with a sensitive issue in America, race relations.
Now, 2 comments on this. Number 1 is a very mechanical one. Controversial is one way to say it. I say controversial. Both are fine. And the second thing is deal with a sensitive issue. I would say the number 1 sensitive issue in America, and I don't think many people would argue.
I think the one big issue that often gets overlooked is that this is also a very early book that wanted to talk about mental illness and dealing with people with disabilities. There were other works. I'm trying to think of the other book. Unfortunately, it's not coming to mind. But there were these early books kind of like describing people with mental illness and the difficulties they had in their life, of mice and
men.
That's
John Steinbeck.
That's right.
That's right.
And this is one of those books that really brought mental illness to the forefront. But because race was such a crucial issue in America, and this comes out in 1960, just before the Civil Rights era, that's really what we remember this book for.
That's right. And in the end, it's people who are simply different. Remember, it's not one particular thing. It's not mental disability. It's not skin color. It's not different culture. It's just being different. That's all it is.
Our next sentence, rather than deal with harsh criticism, Lee decided that it would be the last book she would publish during her lifetime.
This is something we have already talked quite a bit about during the program. And after all of the pushback that she got after this, after publishing this book, she just decided, I don't want to have to deal with this. I'm not writing anymore on this.
This construction here is really useful for you. Please pay attention to the way it's built. Rather than verb object, comma, subject, verb object. We won't say rather than she deal with harsh criticism. We won't use another subject here. It's rather than verb object.
And we could also say rather than dealing with.
Correct.
That's also correct. And we use the word pushback. That was Chris's word. There's another word that's stronger and more negative, and that is backlash.
Yeah.
That means you say or do something that people strongly disagree with, and then they get up and they start shouting and criticizing something. So I would say in this case, you could use the word backlash.
I agree. And backlash is one word.
Right. Okay. So last paragraph. A primary topic in the book is the concept of good and evil. Now that sounds kind of simple because that's the main concept, I think, in a lot of literature and a lot of art, is this unending fight between good and evil.
Primary is another word for basic. Sometimes elementary school is called primary school.
Especially in the UK and in other countries in the States, we have different words for it. We have elementary school and grade school, and we used to call it grammar school, but not so much anymore. Okay, next sentence. It suggests that people are born good, but they can become bad after experiencing evil and hatred in society. And I think that is a central topic of philosophy in probably any society or culture of the world. It certainly has been long discussed in Chinese philosophy. Are people basically good? Are they basically bad? Or are they both? And I think that has to be the answer. But at least in this book, it suggests that normally, actually we are born as good, but if we live in an environment full of evil and bad treatment of others and hatred, we can become bad.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why I enjoy being a teacher is that I work with children. And generally speaking, kids don't want to do a lot of bad things. They generally speaking want to do good things. And I enjoy that positivity. Even if they can be naughty, that's different than being evil.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm a teacher, actually.
One problem with schools is that we ask children to just sit down and be still. Yeah. And adults cannot even be still. Yeah. You look at people waiting at a bus stop. Does anybody ever stand still?
It's what do you do? It's tough to teach everyone and to move everyone around. I understand the push and pull because I'm a very energetic teacher, but I still got to work with 30 kids.
Yep, that's right. So, all right, next sentence. Sadly, it's often innocent members of society like Tom and Boo who suffer most, and it is because of power. You have less power, you're going to suffer more normally.
And you could say suffer the most here. That's totally fine.
Their lives are destroyed because society has unfairly judged and labeled them. By label, we are saying that we have decided that you are this kind of person. Therefore, I don't like you, and you're not as good as I am. And you are a different kind of person, which is also not as good as I am. And in this case, it is race, being black, or being mentally disabled. And that's another class that people tend to look down upon.
I circled this word here, judge, and I drew my arrow all the way back up to the end of paragraph 1 to the word prejudice. Now, prejudice is your noun and judge is your verb here. But I wanted to make that connection between prejudice and judge. They're both a similar and related word, but those pronunciations are a little different. Be careful.
And they involve labeling. Now, I feel this sometimes as a foreigner because I have this particular person who I interact with in life, and they say, well, what do you foreigners think about this? Yeah, you foreigners, what do you do? You know, it's always starting out with you foreigners. I think, excuse me? I mean, you know I'm a foreigner. I know I'm a foreigner. Can we move on? You know, I'm a person. Can you just ask me what you think about this issue instead of what you foreigners think about this issue?
As if you represent everybody. I don't know. When people say that to me, I personally don't get bothered by it. I know a lot of foreigners do. I know a lot do.
This one happens to be a close family member.
Okay. I can see how that would be irritating.
Yeah. Okay. So I was just thinking, do you have to label people? Because when you do, you sometimes put them in a category, you pigeonhole them, and you're not really listening to them as just people. Okay, let's move on. Nonetheless, the book manages to deliver a positive message at its close. Now, as we mentioned, I don't remember all the details on this. I understand this was imposed because they just did not want to put something out there that was just so dark and so negative.
You know, when you said that, I was like, yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. It feels like the Disney ending.
The Disney ending, yeah.
Ray of light, that beacon of hope at the end. That I do see like the editor saying, you're a new author. Could you do this for us?
And we humans have a powerful need for that hope because without hope, why even bother moving on? Atticus is able to teach his children that good and bad exist in everyone and that we should not lose faith in humanity. Now, this is an extremely important point. It is not the same as, well, you know, there's good and bad in the world and blah, blah, blah. We all have good and we all have bad inside of ourselves. So before we're too judgmental of other people, remember, we've all got it inside of ourselves as well. To go on, instead, it's better to sympathize with others and hope that they will eventually change their ignorant and prejudiced views. Now, I don't think there's much value in just hoping for this because usually it doesn't happen. The best you can do is do your own best as an individual. You do your best. Do not behave in a prejudiced way toward other people. You set a good example. That's about all we can do.
So there's this interesting little story that Harper Lee had a strong connection to her high school English teacher. And her teacher was named Miss Gladys Watson. And Harper Lee actually sent Watson a final draft of To Kill a Mockingbird to Watson before it was published. And she actually asked her high school English teacher to proofread and critique it. And after the book was published, Harper Lee flew Watson out to New York City to visit and then took her on a 1-month vacation to England as a way to thank her. Because both Harper Lee and her English teacher had a strong love of English literature. I thought that was wonderful.
That is a wonderful story, and it reminds us all to please remember to feel gratitude towards your teachers. They are forming you. Whatever you have in life, a lot of it will go back to what your teachers have given you.
Well, thank you, Karen.
And thank you, Chris. And that's it for today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.